We're going to begin in John 12. We will briefly refer to Matthew 13 as segue, but our primary study tonight will be in Exodus chapter 3 and Exodus chapter 6. Okay? So if you just want to go ahead and go to Exodus 3 or Exodus 6, Exodus 3 will come first and then Exodus 6. But I have two other scriptures to refer to you to set the stage. In John chapter 12, beginning in verse 27, things are coming to a climax. Jesus knows the time is drawing nigh. It's getting close to time for Passover, the Last Supper in the next chapter, and then the crucifixion. Well, in John 12:27, he says, "Now my soul has become troubled, and what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour?" What do you expect me to say? This is the reason I came, but what do you expect me to say? Father, bail me out? No. But for this purpose I came to this hour. Father, glorify your name. Then a voice came out of heaven. I have both glorified it, and I will glorify it again. So the crowd of people who stood by and heard it were saying, notice their response. They were saying that it had thundered. Others were saying, an angel has spoken to him. Jesus answered and said, this voice has not come for my sake, but for your sakes. You get a worldly response and you get a religious response. The worldly response is, oh, it just thundered. It was a clear voice from heaven. And you get a religious response. Oh, an angel's just talking to him. Okay? Jesus says, this voice has not come for my sakes, but for yours. Now judgment is upon this world. Now the ruler of this world will be cast out. And I, if I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all men to myself. See, whenever you have a spiritual phenomenon like this, like Pentecost, like any other event you see happening in, particularly in the New Testament, there are those in the world that will chalk it up as a natural phenomenon. Oh, it just thundered. You got the religious who are saying, well, we recognize something spiritual happened, but it was happening to him. It's just not for us. Or it happened back in that day, but it's not for us today. Okay? But what was happening is Jesus knew good and well the Father had clearly spoke. He knew, he heard, and he knew the Father was speaking, and he was intentionally speaking. Why? He was revealing and exposing the levels of perception in the crowd, or the lack thereof. Sometimes God will do something, and he just wants to know who's going to chalk it up as just a natural phenomenon, who's going to chalk it up religiously and say, well, that's just what he said to the pastor, it's not for me. And who's going to realize he's speaking to me? He's speaking to me. He's wanting me to know something. Okay, that's why we need to pay attention. So, why are we covering this subject that we've been covering in 2026? The lesson that we are covering tonight was originally intended and scheduled to be taught the first Thursday in January. And here it is 6 months later before I finally get to it. Okay? Because there's something very significant about what we're discussing tonight in 2026. Okay? Matthew 13:22, what we've been talking about, just to bring a little perspective here. Whereas the first two soils in the parable of sower sows the word refer to the seed was sown, the first one was on the beaten path or by the roadside. The second soil, the second seed was sown what? Among rocky soil. It identifies the ground which received it. This third sowing takes a little bit of a different tone. And it's not so much referring to the soil as it is what is among what's growing. And that being thorns. Okay? And it says, this is a man who hears the word, okay? But the worries of this world and the deceitfulness of the riches choke the word. but it's happening under the administration of thorns. Jesus is even going to help us relate to, the Old Testament is going to help us relate to what thorns are in the church today. Okay? What thorns are. In our study, we see that there are 100 species or more than 100 species of thorns and thistles in the Holy Land. They come in tangled masses, just like briar bushes, just like a big sticker bush. And they cause stinging, itching, and irritation, and it will destroy vegetation. Y'all know good and well if you planted a garden, you can get the thorns and it'll just choke the life out of that tomato plant or whatever else you got planted. Okay? Thistles are flowering plants with prickly leaves. In other words, like briars. Jesus equated it in Matthew 7:15 when he said, "Beware of false prophets, because grapes are not gathered from thorn bushes, nor do figs come from thistles." These bare thorns were so sharp that they could cause delirium or even death. Thorns and thistles were used as barricades, if you will. Today we got police tape. Today we got other kind of tape that you can rope something off with and where a do not enter as a barricade. But they used thorns and thistles back in that day. So whereas the Father spoke in John 12, Jesus speaks in Matthew 23, and he says, referring to thorns and thistles, whereas thorns and thistles prevent people from entering somewhere. It's a keep out designation. He says in Matthew 23:13, he says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you shut off the kingdom of heaven from people, and you do not enter in yourselves, nor do you allow those who are entering to enter in." And see, thistles can be beautiful flowers, and they have an appeal to them. They have a strange type of attractiveness if you stare at them. Okay? But thistles, throughout the Old Testament, the prophets used the overgrowth of thorns and thistles to refer to desolation, abandonment, and judgment, because they're so dry that they were fire hazard. They could go up in a heartbeat. Just like your Christmas tree, when you take down that natural Christmas tree after it's been up a month and you go out there and boom, light a match. Whoo. It don't take long to burn it up. That's the way it is with thorns and thistles. Okay, go to Exodus chapter 3. Now, what is the significance of studying thorns and thistles? Thorns and thistles arguably are ministers and church leaders that inflict pain. Many people, maybe even in this room, you've come from churches that you've been wounded. You've been wounded by ministers. That's why a lot of people transfer memberships, is they've been wounded by churches. May not necessarily be the pastor. It could have been an elder, a deacon. It could have been, somebody who's been in that church for years. That's why I'm so proud when I hear good reports of how receptive y'all are to people who come in. Well, in Exodus chapter 3, I'm going to begin in verse 2, but in verses 7 through 9 is where God tells Moses he had heard the cries of Israel in captivity. He had heard the cries, okay? Well, verse 2, "The angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from the midst of a bush." Why does he appear in a bush? Have you ever wondered that? Why does Jesus appear in a bush? Of all things he could appear in, why a bush? We're going to find out tonight. Okay, and he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire. What did we say? A bush of this nature was dry and very flammable. So it was not uncommon to see a dry bush engulfed in flames like your Christmas tree that's been, out of water for a month. Okay? Well, yet the bush was not consumed. It wasn't burning up. So Moses says, "I must turn aside and see this marvelous light. Why the bush is not burned up?" When the Lord saw that he had turned aside to look, when he had his attention, God called to him from the midst of the bush and said, and this is when he calls Moses to go deliver the children of Israel. He says, Moses, Moses. And he said, here I am. Then he said, do not come near here. Remove your sandals from your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. Now, the concept of removing sandals is relinquishing one's rights. Okay? It is a symbolic act. If you want to relinquish your right, you take your shoes off in a ceremony. In Deuteronomy 25, remember when the older brother dies and his wife never bore him any children, namely a son, to carry on the family name. A younger brother, the next in line, then the next in line, whoever, is supposed to marry her and then carry on the family name. All right? Well, if that particular brother didn't want to marry her, for whatever reason, we could imagine, he's already, I don't like that woman, okay? Well, they would have a ceremony, and in that ceremony, he would have to remove his sandals, saying, I'm relinquishing the right. It's the same way with the kinsman redeemer concept that we talked about on Sunday. Okay? If Boaz had the right to redeem Ruth, and he chose not to for whatever reason, he had the legal right to redeem her, but if he chose not to, then he would remove his sandals in the ceremony saying, I'm relinquishing my right. Next, you can do it if you want. Okay? It was something that went on in the Old Testament. Well, he's telling Moses to remove your sandals. Relinquish your right to be right. We're going to do it my way. We've already tried it your way. And you've already murdered 40 years ago. Now here it is 40 years later. I'm calling you to go get my people out of Egypt. But we're going to do it my way. So remove your sandals. He tells Joshua the same thing in Joshua chapter 5 when he appears as the captain of the host. Remove your sandals, for the place of the ground on which you're standing is holy ground. All right, now, in Exodus chapter 3, verse 13, then Moses said to God, behold, I am going to the sons of Israel, and I will say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. Now they may say to me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? In other words, who's sending me? We want to know who sent you. That's what they go ask. So who do I tell them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, thus you shall say to the sons of Israel, I am has sent me to you. This right here is the first revelation of God's covenant name, Yahweh. It's written in Hebrew, and I normally wear a Columbia shirt, but I'm wearing a t-shirt for a reason. Because we read from left to right. Hebrew's written from right to left. Yud, He, Vav, He. It's a tetragrammaton. 4 consonants. Yud, He, Vav, He. We spell it YHWH. Okay? That is Yahweh. You will identify it in the Old Testament. Okay? You'll see it here. You'll see it here particularly. Anytime you see capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D. Lord in all caps. That's Yahweh. Now, for those of you who are sitting there thinking, we see it in Genesis. Yes, you do. But who wrote Genesis? Later on, Moses. After he got this revelation. But I'm going to show you in the Word where he does not reveal the significance of the name in Genesis. He waits till now. Why? Why does he wait till now to reveal the divine covenant name Yahweh? Why? We're going to answer that question. Okay, now, if you will, flip over to Exodus chapter 6. God spoke further to Moses and said to him, now he's going to give him a little dialogue here. And he's going to give him a sermon, if you will. He's going to give him the sermon that when you go to the children of Israel, this is the sermon I want you to preach. I'm going to detail everything I'm going to do for my people. All right? He's going to begin it with, I am Yahweh. He's going to punctuate it with, I am Yahweh. You'll notice. Just like you may open up, hi, this is Charlie. And then when I sign it, Charlie. Okay? All right? Now, That's what he's going to do here. This particular revelation for me goes way back to the late 80s when I was in Bible college. This revelation of Yahweh, I was first received revelation of it, but it is magnified in revelation since then. In my research papers, it was the research paper I did for any Old Testament class I could do it on. Whether it was Old Testament survey, whether it was, the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, any course I took related to the Old Testament, and every course you got to do a research paper. I would intentionally do this. Now, in order to do a good research paper, you need your introduction, your thesis statement, and you need at least Roman numerals 1, 2, and 3. You need at least 3 points, just like in a sermon. Okay, well, I had 3 points. Verses 6, 7, and 8 of Exodus chapter 6. But since then, in the context of the 4 soils, in the context of the 4 categories that we've talked about, I now see 4. I now see 4 promises or 4 obligations that God is going to make to his people. Okay? And it all is wrapped up in this name Yahweh. Exodus chapter 6, verse 2. God spoke further to Moses and said to him, I am Yahweh, and I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as God Almighty, El Shaddai. I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in Genesis. The whole book of Genesis, pretty much after you get past Adam and Eve and Noah, it kicks in with Abraham and then Isaac and Jacob, and they're the main characters for the rest of the book of Genesis. He's saying, for all of your forefathers, they only knew me as El Shaddai. They did not. He says, but by my covenant name, Yahweh, I did not make myself known to them. Why? Why wait till now? Why wait till now to reveal your covenant name to Moses? Not to Abraham, not to Isaac, not to Jacob. Furthermore, what's the significance of us studying this in 2026? What's the significance? The Hebrew alphabet is 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. Each of them are alphanumeric. Each letter has a numerical value to it. And I'm not trying to get over into numerology or some kind of spooky stuff, but everything Jesus puts in this Bible, everything God puts in the Bible has significance, and he does it for a reason. Okay? 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 11 says, everything that happened to Israel in their history, it happened to them as an example, and it was written for our instruction. He says, you will continue to unfold truths that relate to what you read in the Old Testament with the plight of Israel. Okay? Yud, He, Vav, He. Yud has a numerical value of 10. He is the number 5, is the 5th letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and it has a numerical value of 5. It's also the number of for grace. It stands for grace. Okay? Yud, He, Vav has a numerical value of 6. Because it comes right after He. Then you got He, again, a numerical value of 5. 10 plus 5 plus 6 plus 5. What does it add up to? 26. It's no coincidence. There's more coincidence coming up. Hang tight. So we could argue that 2026 is the year of Yahweh. It's the year for him to fulfill in our life what he promises the children of Israel. Because after all, everything that happened to them happened as an example, and it was written for our instruction. Okay? Why did he appear in a bush? Hold that thought. Okay? Leave you hanging there for a moment. Okay? Verse 6. Now he's going to give his message. Say therefore to the sons of Israel, when you meet up with the children of Israel, when you have your sermon, here's what I want you to preach. I am Yahweh. He begins it with I am Yahweh. And I will, number one, again, there's four of them. Number one, I will bring you out from under the burden of the Egyptians. It's a promise. Yatsah, I will break you out. I will get you and I will help you escape from under the burden of the Egyptians. That burden is an oppressive weight of forced labor. And it began in Exodus chapter 1 and verse 11. Throughout the book of Genesis and through the end, at the end of the book of Genesis, I should say, everything revolves around Joseph. Okay, you know, Joseph, second in command. Joseph, next to Pharaoh, is the most respected man on the face of the earth. He has all that favor. Well, he dies. A new sheriff, a new Pharaoh rises up. And he says in Exodus chapter 1, these people of Israel may side with our enemy and we're in trouble. The same motive that King Balak used last week to go hire Balaam. So he says, we're going to oppress these people and we're going to put them in slavery, in bondage. And God has been hearing their cry ever since. Every time they got whipped, every time they had to work all day in the heat, every time they thought they were done for the day and the taskmaster cracked the whip and said, no, get back to work. God, where are you? He's been hearing all those cries. He says, I will bring you out from under the burden of the Egyptians, and I will deliver you, which is a different Hebrew word, not Saul, which means snatch you out to rescue you. So he says, I will bring you out and I will deliver you. This is all part of promise number one. What's the difference between bring you out, which is Yatsah, and I will deliver, which is not Saul? The best way I can explain it is this, for the sake of time. It's no different than if you go break somebody out of prison. First order of business is to break them out of their jail cell. The second order of business is to get them across that barbed wire to get them out of the compound. Okay? It's twofold. You got to get them out of the cell, then you got to break them out of the prison compound. He's saying, I will deliver you out of that house where that cruel taskmaster is driving you. I'm going to get you out of that cell. And in crossing the Red Sea, I'm going to get you out of that compound called Egypt. Egypt, by definition, means a place of confinement and restriction. So anybody that's in a place of confinement or restriction, the name Yahweh promises, I will get you out of that mess. I will get you out of that jam. I will deliver you out of that cell, and I'll deliver you out of that compound. Okay, read on. Number two, I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great judgments. Gaal. It's the concept of a kinsman redeemer, as we talked about with Boaz. I can buy you back. Later on, it would be used to refer to buying back a slave. I'm going to buy you back. I'm going to take care of whatever needs to be done, whatever price has got to be paid. I'm going to pay it to redeem you out of that mess. I'm going to deliver you, number one. Number two, I'm going to redeem you. I'm going to set you free. Every which way, I'm going to set you free. Then what happens? You cross the 50, so to speak. Number three, then I will take for you my people. There's your adoption. Deliverance, redemption, adoption. I will adopt you for my people, and I will be your God, and you'll know that I am Yahweh your God, who brought you out from under the burden of the Egyptians. How's he going to do it? Parting the Red Sea, pillar of fire by night, cloud by day, water from a rock, manna on the ground, quail coming out of nowhere. I'm going to prove to you that I delivered you, I redeemed you, getting you across that Red Sea. I got you out of the cell, I'm getting you out of the compound. I'm going to adopt you as my own. Then number four, I will bring you to the land, which is promise. Deliverance, redemption, adoption, promise. Okay? I used to do deliverance, adoption, and promise until the Lord showed me the difference between deliverance and redeeming. Okay? There you got your four categories. Category 1, Category 2, Category 3, Category 4. In Category 3, you're adopted. You're saved. Category 4, you enter into the promised land and wield dominion over your circumstances. And he says, which I swore to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I will give it to you for a possession. Talking about the promised land. I am Yahweh. He punctuates it and signs it. He says, so Moses spoke thus to the sons of Israel, but they did not listen to Moses on account of their impatience and cruel bondage. They blew him off. Okay, so you got deliverance, redemption, adoption, and promise. Let me ask you as it relates to us today. At what stage do many people in church level off? Do they level off right after they get delivered? Say, for instance, they had a major physical crisis. Say, for instance, they were in an auto accident. Say, for instance, they were hooked on drugs or whatever. And God delivers them out of that house, delivers them out of that city, delivers them out of that neighborhood. He gets them out of that culture. Okay? Then he redeems them. He sets them free on the inside. Okay? He gets all that stuff out of their system. At what point did they level off and just become religious? They got a testimony of how God delivered me, and many people just get involved in church after deliverance and they never follow through and get saved. Many people go to step 2 and they get redeemed and they get cleaned up. And they get involved with church activity, join the church, they think they're good. And they never develop a personal relationship with him. They never fully renounce, the world's value system. How many people after they're adopted, they level off and they never want to pursue the keys of the kingdom that we've been talking about the last couple of weeks on Sunday? They just find, hey, I got my salvation. I've been adopted. I'm good. I'm going to heaven. I got my ticket punched. I can level off and just enjoy church now. And never want to pursue God's best, the land of promise. So what is the significance of all this for our study in 2026? Why did God wait till Moses to reveal the name Yahweh, who has the numerical value of 26? 10, 5, 6, 5. Why wait? Because Moses lived in the 26th generation from Adam. Don't tell me it's a coincidence, because it's not. Don't tell me it just happened to be that way. He deliberately waited, because he says, Moses, these people are going to have to know me as Yahweh if they're going to follow you out of Egypt. They've got to know the covenant name Yahweh, and they've got to trust me. They've got to trust me that I will deliver them. I will redeem them. I will adopt them, and I will take them to the promised land that was sworn to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, their fathers, the father of their faith. They got to know it. So he waited till Moses, who lived in the 26th generation, whatever it is, 40 years or whatever that generation was in that time. He lived in the 26th generation. Now, for this bush that he appears in, why a bush? In the Hebrew, it is C-N-A-H. Sanah, Kanah, however you pronounce it. And it refers to a bramble bush, a thorn and sticker bush. Now, in addition to the actual scripture, just like we have history books, we're celebrating 250 years of American history. If you go to Philadelphia, or if you go to Washington, D.C., or any place that's got a historical museum, and you see all these documents, you see the Declaration of Independence, you see the Constitution of the United States, do you believe it? Do you believe that that occurred in our history? Yeah, you do. Well, so do the Jewish people. Is the Constitution of the United States written in the Bible? No. But is the Constitution, was it a historical bit that took place? Yeah. Okay. Well, likewise, you have the Talmud, you have the Dead Sea Scrolls, and you have this Midrash. Midrash is a collection of rabbinical Jewish commentaries that they actually interpret and explain the hidden meanings in the Hebrew Bible. In the Bible, it just simply says a bush. The Midrash explains what type of bush. Okay? The Midrash says this, that this particular bush was the thorniest bush in the entire world. Why did he appear in a bush? It was the thorniest bush in the entire world. Furthermore, the Midrash says this, it was observed by those who wrote the Jewish commentary, any bird that flew into a bush like God appeared in, like Jesus appeared in, any bird that flew in, they would not escape without tearing limb from limb. There's no way you're going to fly in and fly out unharmed, unscathed. It ain't happening. And yet, Old Testament and Jesus in the New Testament, he says you better watch out for thorns in the church. Because people fly into that church and they don't get out without being wounded. If you've got a thorn in the pulpit and you've got thistles as deacons and elders. If you've got thorns and thistles in leadership, you got people who will come in wounded and they go get even more church hurt while they're in that bush. But Jesus appears in the midst of the bush to say, I see you and I hear you and I hear your cries. I see every bit of that church hurt. I see every bit of that pain that you've experienced. And I identify with it. That's why he appeared in this burning bush. He's saying, I'm identifying with my people. I hear their cries. I've heard them all along. Every moan and groan, ache and pain. I've seen their bent over state. I've seen their whelps on their bodies, and I've seen the stripes on their backs. And I've heard all their sleepless nights when they're crying out me for deliverance. And he says, I hear everything that you've suffered, everything that you've gone through, both in the world and in the church. He says, I identify with it. And Jesus did identify with it. Okay? The Midrash declares, I'm not just interpreting this, the Midrash actually draws this conclusion, that by God appearing in this bush, the lowliest bush, it also notes in the Talmud. The Talmud says it's the lowliest bush. It says that by God appearing in the lowliest and thorniest of all bushes, he was identifying with what was regarded as the most oppressive slavery in the world, that of Egypt. He recalls that he hears the cries, and that's what the Midrash says. I'm not just telling you my interpretation, I'm telling you what the Midrash says. A Jewish commentary written way back then. Because they know what type of bush it was that God appeared in. Moses told them. It was a thorn and thistle bush. Okay, that explains it. Okay, now, how does that relate to Jesus? Matthew chapter 27, right before Jesus goes to the cross, right after he's beaten, what happens? Matthew 27:29. And when they had platted a crown of thorns, they put it on his head. That word platted is impleco. It refers to jagged vines loaded with prickly, razor-sharp thorns, and they would often dip them in poison, which would cause that delirium. Jesus wore a crown of thorns. So it's saying that Jesus is identifying. I'm going to show you that Jesus is the one who appears in the bush. Not God the Father, not Holy Spirit. It's a pre-incarnate manifestation of Jesus. Because now Jesus in human form is going to wear a crown of thorns to identify with you and me. I've seen all your hurt. Whether it's the hurt you suffered in the world, in Egypt, or whether it's the religious hurt you suffered at the hands of thorns and thistles. You flew into that bush. You stayed there for a number of years. You left that church and you left wounded. And he says, I hear every bit of those hurts. And I'm here for you. And I'm here to heal those wounds. Genesis 3:18, we see that thorns and thistles were part of the curse of the ground. But Galatians 3:13 says that Christ has redeemed us from the curse of the law, having been made a curse for us. So, impleco is the word that's used for how they plaited a crown of thorns. They took those sharp thorns and they plaited it. They wove it together. Okay? They got the thorns and thistles tangled up before they put it on his head. They tangled them up in a circular form. Okay? Paul uses that same word in pleco in 2 Timothy 2:4. He says, no man that warreth today. No believer who goes about the life of a believer. No man that warreth today entangle himself with the affairs of this life. You're not going to get tangled up in that mess. This word also referred to the lower garments, the lower gowns. Remember we said that the father of the younger prodigal had to pull up his gown to go run into him to avoid a Kezazah ceremony? Well, you had to pull that garment up if you were going to run a race or if you were going to run in any way, shape, or form. You would have to pull your garment up, and they would either tuck it in their girdle, or they had a leather belt that when they pulled their gown up so their legs could run without getting tangled up in the gown, but also to keep from getting tangled up in thorns and thistles. Okay? Whenever they pulled it up, and they either in their girdle or in their belt, right here at their waistline. That is the terminology that Paul uses. He says about girding your loins with truth. Don't get tangled up in thorns and thistles. Now, I got to explain to you the significance of Yahweh. Okay, so just listen. There's not, I got some scriptures I'll refer to, but just listen. Okay? Here is Yahweh in a nutshell. All right? You actually see it in the book of Genesis. Now, in Genesis chapter 1, it starts out, and God, Elohim, God created the heavens and the earth. God said, let there be light. God created the fish of the sea, the birds of the air. God, G-O-D. All that's Elohim. Even when he created man in Genesis 1:26. Then God said, let us create man. Okay. Well, when you get to chapter 2 and verse 4, Moses shifts gears and he says, okay, I'm going to highlight the creation of man and talk about it again. And that's why in verse 7 he says, God breathed into Adam's nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. Well, in Genesis chapter 2 and verse 4, when he's specifically talking about relationship with man, in Genesis 2:4 is the first time you see capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D. He doesn't explain the significance in Genesis because he says Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, everybody else, Noah, Adam, they just knew me as El Shaddai. They knew me as Creator, Elohim. But I waited to the 26th generation to reveal my name Yahweh with a numerical value of 26 to you, Moses. Okay? But Moses writes the book of Genesis, so that's why he uses L-O-R-D, all caps. In Genesis chapter 3 is when we have the fall. And I can teach more on this in a different message, but let me give you the 45-second version. Okay? The devil comes as a serpent to Eve, and he says, has God said, Elohim, you shall not eat of this tree? Because the devil can't know him as Yahweh. It's impossible. That's his covenant name. That's only for a personal relationship. And the devil has no personal relationship. So he can only refer to him as God the Creator. So he goes to Eve and he says, has God said? So he's talking to her. When Eve responds, she says, God has said. And the moment she said it, he says, I got you. You don't know him any better than I do. I only know him as Elohim, and apparently you only know him as Elohim either. So you are perfect prey for me to come at. And that's why she ate. Because she didn't have revelation of a relationship. Okay? Now, and some of you go make cringe in your chair when I tell you this, because it's go ruffle some religious feathers. God's name is not Jehovah. It's Yahweh. It is not Jehovah. So let me explain. The Jews from day one They had such a holy reverence for the name Yahweh. Back in Moses' day, all these religious leaders, they genuinely had a holy reverence for the name Yahweh. They considered it blasphemy if you said it the wrong way. If you didn't take it seriously, if you just read through it quickly, no. We are so careful when we get to YHWH. So it was often written and never spoken because they were afraid they were going to blaspheme. They were just so afraid we will say it wrong. Well, the name Yahweh comes from an old Semitic root, Hayah, which means to be or to become. So therefore, the name Yahweh signifies an immediacy of presence. So he wants Moses to let the people know, I am with you. I hear your cries. My presence is with you. Yahweh signifies an immediacy of presence. Psalm 46:1. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in time of trouble. Okay? Now, go back to Yahweh. The Hebrew tetragrammaton. Yud, He, Vav, He. Okay? Read right to left. During the intertestamental period, between the Old Testament and New Testaments, the Jews were still concerned about this possibility of blaspheming the name. So what they did is they came up with this idea, and instead of saying Yahweh, when we get to capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D, we're going to say Adonai, because Adonai is capital L, lowercase O-R-D. So when we get to YHWH, we're just going to say Adonai. Well, that didn't work. That just wasn't working. They just that just ain't right. His name is Yahweh. So they came up with a plan. And their plan was this: to remind people to say Adonai out of fear of blaspheming, but to maintain the integrity of YHWH. They decided to take the vowels of Adonai and put it in between the consonants of Yahweh. Well, that seemed to satisfy them for a while, because now they could say the vowels of Adonai in between YHWH, and they got Yehovah. Yehovah. Okay? Well, that worked fine until the Germans came along. And you know, with the Germans, their Y's are pronounced as J's. Would you like to go? Jess. Okay? And their W's are pronounced as V's. Where you going? You know, that's just their pronunciation. So when the Germans got a hold of Yehovah, it became Jehovah. That's where Jehovah came from. But that's not his name. His name is Yahweh. So blame it on the Germans. Okay? So you see revelation of Yahweh in Exodus 3, as we noted, in Exodus 6, but again in Exodus 33:19, when it says, and he said, I myself will make all my goodness pass before you, and will proclaim the name of Yahweh before you. I will be gracious unto whom I'll be gracious, and will show compassion on whom I will show compassion. That's the name Yahweh. Okay? Paul refers to it word for word in Romans 9, verses 15 through 16. He refers right back to this revelation of Yahweh. Okay, so remember, it signifies an immediacy of presence. Now, when you hear the divine name for God in the Old Testament, and let's just, for the sake of what you're used to, let's go with Jehovah. What is the most common name of God in the Old Testament using the word Jehovah that you remember? What's the most common one that comes to mind? Based on some of the songs that you've heard lately. Jehovah Jireh. We used to sing a song. Hosanna put it out. Jehovah Jireh, my provider, his grace is sufficient for me, for me, for me. Jehovah Jireh, my provider, his grace is sufficient for me. We sang that growing up. Okay? Well, the Jehovah Jireh, it sings so good because of the It sings so good. But that's not his name. It's Yahweh Yireh. Now, where do you get that revelation? In Genesis chapter 22, verse 14, when God provides a ram so Isaac is not slain. The Lord will provide. And Abraham called it Yahweh Yireh. And he didn't even have revelation of the name yet. It didn't come till Moses. Yahweh Yireh. Furthermore, let me give you another definition of Yahweh Yireh. We just simply used a textbook definition, the Lord will provide. Here's another definition. The God who sees to it. Same concept. He's the God who will see to it. I'm going to deliver you. I'm going to redeem you. I'm going to adopt you. And I'm going to bring you into the promised land. And I'm going to see to it that you get there. I'm going to see you out of this situation. Because I've heard your cries and I'm going to see you out of it. Also, you hear Jehovah Rapha. Yahweh Rapha. The Lord who heals. Exodus 15:26. The Lord who heals. I am Yahweh who heals you. You hear it in Yahweh Nisi. Exodus 17:15. The Lord is our banner. How many people? We just got a new American flag in this week to help celebrate the 4th. Maybe others of you bought a new American flag. Maybe you got American flag hanging or flying at your house. Troops, what do they go gather around? They go gather around the flag. You look at the World Cup going on now, soccer. When America wins, what are they rallying around? That U.S. flag. USA, USA, USA. Because a flag is a rallying point. And he says the name Yahweh is a rallying point. I am Yahweh Nisi. I am the Lord your banner. It comes from Exodus 17, commemorating the victory over the Amalekites. You got Yahweh Makadesh, the Lord who sanctifies, the Lord who makes holy. You see that in Leviticus 20, verse 8, Ezekiel 37, verse 28. You got Yahweh Shalom, the Lord is our peace. Judges 6 and verse 24. Yahweh Shalom. You see Yahweh Elohim. Now you see that in Genesis 24. Genesis 2:4. Whenever Moses hones in on the account of creation. This is an account of Yahweh God. Okay? Yahweh Elohim. Then you got Yahweh Sidkenu. The Lord is our righteousness. Jeremiah 33:16. Then you have Yahweh Rohi. The Lord is my shepherd. Psalm 23, verse 1. It's still Yahweh. Okay? Then you got Yahweh Shammah. The Lord is there. Ezekiel 48:35. Also Ezekiel 44, verses 1 through 4. Then you have Yahweh Sabaoth, the Lord of hosts. Isaiah 124, Psalm 46:7. The Lord of the angel army and the Lord of us. Okay? The Lord of hosts. Now, we can say with full assurance that every one of these names is all wrapped up in one name. Jesus. And I'm going to prove to you that Jesus is Yahweh. Jesus is Yahweh who appeared in that burning bush. Jesus is Yahweh who appeared as the captain of the host. Jesus is Yahweh who appeared as that rock. 1 Corinthians 10:4. Jesus is Yahweh. Okay? Yud, He, Vav, He is comprised of 3 Hebrew root words. Yeh, he will be. Hove, being. Haya, he was. He was, he is, he will be. Hebrews 13:8. Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. It matches. Jesus is Yahweh. The Hebrew letters have a corresponding picture, just like on your phonics charts. If you got a little kindergartner and they're trying to learn their vowel sounds, on their phonics charts you'll see a cat. Cat. They'll see a spool of yarn. Yarn. Okay? Well, the Hebrew alphabet is pictorial as well. Yud has the picture of an open hand. He is the number for grace. Vav looks like a hook, like a nail that you can hang a coat on hang a hat on. And then He is the number for grace. Open hand of grace, nailed in grace. Jesus on the cross. We're not done yet. We got more. In John 8:56, Jesus says, your father Abraham, he goes back and identifies with their father Abraham, rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it and was glad. So the Jews said to him, you're not yet 50 years old, and you've seen Abraham? Jesus said to him, truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was, I am Yahweh. He identifies himself, I am Yahweh. And they picked up stones to throw at him because they didn't receive him as the Messiah, and they certainly aren't receiving him as Yahweh. Okay? I'm almost done here. John 18, verses 4 through 6. So Jesus, knowing all things were coming upon him, went forth and said to them, whom do you seek? This is when they came to arrest him. And they answered, Jesus the Nazarene. He said to them, I am. Even that little he in your Bible is italicized because it's not in the original language. And the moment he says I am, everybody fell out. Matthew 14, 26 through 29. When the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, it's a ghost. They cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, take courage, I am. Your Bible says it is I. Original language, I am. I am. And Peter took that word and walked on the word. You say he walked on the water, but he walked on the word. On that revelation. Okay? John 19. This is what we close with. And we're done. In John 19, verses 19 to 22. Whenever Jesus goes to the cross, or any particular one who's being crucified, they would have this sign, a titulus, in which they would put the charge, murderer, adulterer, whatever. They would put the charge on that particular plaque. And as they're going to Golgotha, everybody could see what the charge is. Okay? What this guy is being charged with. Then they hang it above his head. And Jesus had a plaque hanging above his head. Do you know what it says? It says, Yeshua, HaNazari, Wemelech, Hehudim. Yeshua is Jesus, HaNazari of Nazareth, Wemelech the king, Hehudim of the Jews. Okay? Now, the Jews go ballistic. I'm talking about the Jewish leaders. The religious leaders, they go ballistic. Why? Because of the acrostic. Yeshua begins with a Y, HaNazari with an H. You'll see Wemelech with a V because of that German influence, but it's Wemelech, there's your W, and then Hehudim is an H. Y-H-W-H. And that made them furious. They go to Pilate. It says, Pilate wrote an inscription and put it on the cross. It was written, Jesus the Nazarene, the King of the Jews. Yeshua, HaNazari, Wemelech, Hehudim. So the chief priests of the Jews were saying to Pilate, do not write the King of the Jews, but that he says, that he claims to be the King of the Jews. Pilate answers, what I've written, I've written. Bottom line, God got the last laugh in. He got the last word in. Y-H-W-H. You just crucified Yahweh. The most holy name that you didn't even want to say. The most holy name that you tried to avoid out of reverential fear of not blaspheming. You accused him of blaspheming, and you put him on a cross. You just crucified your Yahweh. And he put it to him. You just crucified your Yahweh who brought you out of Egypt. The same one who appeared to Moses, your forefather. The same one who created you. You just put him on a cross. And you killed him. Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey. I will see to it. I will deliver you. I will redeem you. I will adopt you. And I will take you in the land of promise. And although you've flown into a thorn bush and you've been wounded, he says, I see your pain and I will come to get you out of it. Amen?